Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Poem story in my series of videos that tell you the stories behind the poems that I wrote in my first collection, Between Hindsight and Foresight. This week's poem is called Freedom's Judgment, and it's one of a series of poems that are included in the collection that were originally part of a university assignment. Now, I had the same poem, the same groupings of poems last week when I was talking about I'm Not to Blame. Another poem that is from this particular grouping that I submitted as a university assignment was called Fear. So you can check out those videos earlier on in the series. So Freedom's Judgment was meant to reflect our study of the form of poetry called Villanelle, the most famous of which is Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. So Freedom's Judgment is the first Villanelle form poem that I ever wrote. And some of what I tried to do with Freedom's Judgment was to use the form, but not in the strictest sense, because I wanted to see if I could make it work whilst playing with some of the vocabulary. It's meant to have a repetition of the first line the first line and the third line in the first verse throughout the poem. However, I tried to play with one of the words at the end of the line, rain. Now, so because I was playing with the words at the end of the line, rain makes this not a strict villanelle because the wording is supposed to be the same on the repetition of lines, but I was playing with homophones. So the three homophones in this villanelle are reign, as in the ruling time period that you are in charge of yourself or a country. Rain, as in literally the water that comes from the sky, and rein, as in the leather strapping used to control a horse. So it was all around this sound rain to reflect different ideas or different things about the theme of the poem. The theme of the poem was about how society judges people. Older society judges younger society on how easy they have it. It's, a very, very common thing. Those who live through a particular tumultuous period of time judge the next generation as having it easy. Whether that's people from the First World War judging people for the between war period, or people from the Second World War judging people that come after the Second World War. The different generations are always telling the younger generation how they have it easy, how it's so much better for them than it was. And so Freedom's Judgment, the whole concept of the title, the whole concept of the poem, was meant to reflect that frustration that I felt in at the beginning of my university career, that because we have freedom, because we have more choice, because we have more technology, because we have a better quality of life overall than previous generations, I became frustrated with the concept that that meant anything I felt or suffered when I felt that I was angry or hurt or sad or depressed, that I didn't have a right to those feelings. That, oh, you should have seen it when I was younger, or oh, you should suffer what I have suffered, and then you have a right to be depressed, or then you have a right to feel pressured or tragic or upset. And I know I try to resist it, but obviously everybody goes through it. Every person takes their turn as the younger generation and the older generation. And we shake our heads and, oh God, how can you not remember that? That was the most monumental thing to ever happen in history. Okay, it was 20 years ago. No, something 10 years ago does not count as old. These kind of things are mobile. This attitude, this concept that what you have been through is more important than things that come after, or is more valid. And I try to resist that in my own self, because obviously pain and suffering is relative. And it's all relative to your own experience. If you don't know something, you can't compare it. And so trying to compare an experience you have been through with an experience you haven't been through just because someone else hasn't shared it can't really work. It's not about equal types of challenges. It's not about equal levels of challenges. It's about, ironically, your own individual experience and how you cope with it or deal with it and what you get from it. Equally ironically, I wrote this poem about my frustration that people were treating my generation, millennials, as if we didn't deserve to complain about our lives because there wasn't any war in our lives. That, we didn't have the First or the Second World War. We didn't have the Vietnam War. We didn't have the Korean War. We didn't even, I was only 10 when the first Desert Storm happened. But ironically, I wrote this poem with that frustration in the spring term of university right before 9/11. So 9/11 happened and brought war and blood into my reign, into my generation's reign, and we were forever changed by it. So there is that rolling sense of history, that rolling sense of the judgment of history and the judgment of the freedoms that we have and what we choose to do with them. And I think that with everything that's going on, we need to be aware of suffering of the next generation and the pressure of the next generation. We need to not forget our own lessons that we have learned from our own suffering, but we need to be careful not to lose freedom for anyone because we judge their pressure and suffering as less. I think that a lot more listening and cooperation is probably more beneficial. I think sharing of experience, sharing of suffering, sharing of joy, sharing of unity and community is way more beneficial than blame and destruction, where one side is, oh, well, I'm worse off than you. I deserve more than you because I'm worse off than you. I think it would be much more beneficial if both sides look at each other and say, how can I help? How can I help you? How can you help me? How can we work together to move forward in that? And so, my first attempt at this really unusual form, this really kind of infrequently used form, came out in anger and ended up being prophecy in that concept of rolling experience. I have since I wrote this written several villanelles, two of which I've already done videos for: Worshipping Leith, which was my most recently written villanelle, and Losing My Senses, which was written around the same time as Freedom's Judgment. When I first experience a form, I tend to go a little crazy with it. I cannot tell you how many sonnets I wrote in high school because I just became fascinated by the sonnet form and how to express myself in the challenges of that technique. So I use villanelles because they are so challenging when I have a really intense or powerful emotion or idea to explore. That doesn't always work. Sometimes it's very difficult because obviously the repetition of lines still has to make sense. If you are interested in the other versions or the other stories behind those particular poems, please do check out the previous videos, and please do feel free to share any of your thoughts and ideas on the thoughts and ideas I expressed in my previous videos. I hope you have enjoyed the experience of this story for Freedom's Judgment, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.